Welcome to the Scotland's Choice podcast. The journey to our referendum is underway, so join us as we discuss how together we can build a fairer, a more equal and a more prosperous Scotland. Our goal is to ensure that our listeners are informed, that they're encouraged to get involved, and will hopefully inspire others to think about the possibilities for Scotland. The past few years have only served to highlight what allowing Westminster to make choices for us is like. So let's make the choices we want for our families and our communities right here in Scotland. I'm your host, Drew Hendry MP. Now let's find out who's joining me on Scotland's Choice today.
Hi Drew, I'm Tommy Sheppard. I'm the Member of Parliament for Edinburgh East, and delighted to be on the podcast at last. Delighted also to be out of the heat and in a room with the air conditioner appears to be working for now.
Good, yeah. As we're talking, it's obviously Westminster's heated up. It's nearly 40 degrees outside as we're sitting here just now, so it's really, really hot in the building. But there's also a lot going on in Westminster in terms of more heat than light, as per usual, down here. Hey, Tommy, I want to, before I come to that, and we will talk about that later, I want to ask you about your past and your journey to becoming an MP in the SNP. You used to be a Labour Party politician. You were a member until 2003, I understand. In really simple terms for our listeners, what made you give up the Labour Party?
Yeah, the last card I can find in my archive is 2001, actually, but I can't remember. I mean, to all intents and purposes, I had left by the end of the century, to be honest. So, I mean, I joined at university. I was at Aberdeen University, and started off being part of the broad left as a sort of independent person, because I'm from, Northern Ireland. I don't have any particular Labour background or anything. I'm an Ulster Protestant kid that was brought up there and then escaped to go and try and study medicine at Aberdeen University. So when I got to Aberdeen, I was already quite political and engaged in various environmental campaigns and stuff like that. And I just dived straight into the formative of political activity. And within a year, I stopped doing medicine because I didn't really concentrate on my studies and ended up with a degree in sociology and politics. So I was very active, and the Labour Party was sort of a sort of obvious choice, because at that time I've always believed I'm a sort of democratic socialist. I believe in a world where there's equality and social justice, and where people, where the common interest is elevated above the private interest. I believe that it's in our nature as human beings that we're social animals. We need to work together in harmony with each other and this environment. And to try and drive public policy in that direction, you needed two things. One, you needed a political vehicle that was sort of on message with that, but also you needed a political vehicle which was capable of generating a mass, a mass sort of campaign amongst the people. I mean, I've never had much time for people who are right but incredibly obscure, because they, it's one, there's no point being correct if you don't win in a particular manner. So the Labour Party was that mass party vehicle on the centre left at that time, and I joined it. And I was a fairly active member. I mean, I stood for Parliament in '92. Yeah. I was a Labour councillor in London for 8 years, including deputy leader of the London Borough of Hackney. And then I went back to Scotland to become Assistant General Secretary of the Scottish Labour Party, and worked 3 years as a full-time official. So yeah, I wasn't just a fellow traveller. I was in with the bricks with the Labour Party, and appointed under John Smith to that full-time position, and pretty much asked to leave by Tony Blair.
That's quite a resume for there. I bet people will know if they've been watching both the temperature and politics just now, that we were talking about this time that we're here at Westminster just now. Hot it is outside, but at the time of recording, we also figured out that we still don't know who the final two candidates are in the Tory party contest to become their leader and Prime Minister. Just following on from the Labour aspect, would you agree that Keir Starmer, with his latest stance on Brexit and a number of other things, wouldn't look out of place next to some of these candidates?
Yeah, I mean, it's a low bar, to be honest, but I think there is a case to be made that Keir Starmer is the worst Labour Party leader ever, to be honest. he doesn't appear to believe in anything and has no message to the public in Britain apart from we're not these guys. I mean, that is what it has boiled down to. I don't think you can mobilize and motivate people or change the world with such a lack of ambition, to be honest. And then, before we get into his personal qualities and abilities, I think the problem is political.
And it's one of principles as well, because the latest slogan is "Make Brexit Work," which from his previous utterances that he absolutely doesn't believe in. But it's very similar to the Tory leadership and the "Get Brexit Redone" or "Make Brexit Deliver." There isn't a fag paper between them in terms of these things, and that's not the stance that he's had previously. Is that part of the problem with Labour now? They're just willing to throw off the previous.
I'm still friendly with some people in the Labour Party, and particularly here in London, and it's really worrying what's happening now, because the machine inside the Labour Party, I mean, they've got this phobia about Corbyn and Corbynism, and they're trying to excoriate the party from that. But they're now actually coming after what used to be called the soft left, right? But they see that as a gateway drug, basically, to Corbynism, and they're now clamping down on that as well. With it's not even a right-wing version of social democracy that they're offering. It is simply a matter of achieving office and keep the policy perspectives as empty as possible, make no promises to anyone. And it's just not going to work. I mean, Keir Summer reminds me of that guy who said, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others.
Exactly.
I mean,
so famous Groucho Marx quote.
Indeed. Nice Groucho Marx.
I'm not sure if you've seen it. You probably have one of the latest videos that's been put out on social media by Yes Scott, featuring folk from Dundee speaking about why we need independence for Scotland. One of the contributors had a great line. He said, "Labour in Scotland follows Labour in England. Labour in England follows the Tories." We've just discussed how that's the case on Brexit, but which other areas do you struggle to see the difference between the Tories and Labour in Westminster?
Well, quite a few. I mean, independence would be the obvious one, and I think this is
straight away.
Well, we'll maybe come back to that. But I mean, it is weird, actually, because we know that, even though a lot of people have transferred their support away from the Labour Party, of the people that still remain of that core Labour vote, still fully a third of them support independence. And yet, Labour makes no recognition of that at all. And it seems that Anna Sauer's strategy now is to, he sees political opinion in Scotland divided 50-50, and his mission is to become the majority voice on the 50% of the union side of the argument. He has nothing to say to those people who want to change the way that we are governed, and I think that's going to be a recipe for failure, and it's very disappointing from the party that was once the party of Home Rule, to be honest. So now, you cannot out-unionist the Tories. It's a beaten docket. So why they are trying this, I don't know.
And there's no lesson.
It'll only be a matter of time till we have another Scottish Labour Party. They're running out of options, to be honest. But I mean, but it is quite sad. I mean, I firmly believe that the salvation of the Labour Party in Scotland is independence. I mean, that gives it a rationale. At the minute, its only rationale is to defend the establishment here at Westminster, and an establishment which I mean, it's not that it doesn't want to deliver; it cannot deliver for Scotland. I mean, in order to rejuvenate and renew our country, we need to have the political agency of a normal nation state, just to do fairly basic things. It's not going to happen as long as we're controlled from here.
And of course, it's not just independence, but some of the things that are really important to to the Scottish public and the way that people see things: immigration, the recent strike action, union engagement, corporation tax, nuclear weapons, all of these things. Keir Starmer even dropped a pledge to scrap the privatisation of the NHS outsourcing as well. These are fundamental things that people in Scotland, would have a point of disagreement on. But
I know. I mean, and it's incredibly depressing. And yet there's some Labour activists in Edinburgh who will tell you that it's the SNP that's the right-wing organisation, and the SNP government's all bad. And they've it's almost like a psychosis that they can believe that when it is so manifestly obvious what Labour is doing when it gets a chance to do it. And it's a pity, I think. I mean, I wish it wasn't like this. I wish we, because there is an argument to be had amongst the centre left about whether or not, independence is necessary to achieve the social and economic change that we aspire to. I'm happy to engage in that argument, but it's as if Labour has vacated that territory. They are now firmly positioning themselves as right of centre, as pro-private sector, against trade unions, against nuclear, against nuclear disarmament, and a whole range of other things, leaving ourselves and the Greens to be the parties that champion, champion things like equality and decency on the centre left of Scottish politics.
Another thing I find bizarre is they're quite happy to see the Scottish Government spending money from budgets that it could be spending elsewhere on different things, trying to mitigate Tory policies. And they've no answer to that. They've never supported the devolution of powers, for example, even if they don't believe in going to full independence. As you said, they used to be the party of home rule. Now they're not even the party of devolution. It's quite bizarre, isn't it?
And then they condemn the Scottish Government for not doing enough.
Yes.
For not mitigating more.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. Well, I mean, it's politics, I suppose, but I think it's such a transparent conceit that it's actually easy to see through. And I think the Scottish public are seeing through it. It's not credible for Anna Sarwar to take the position that he is taking on so many things.
And it's leading them into so many difficulties with their own members in different ways as well. We've seen councillor candidates suspended or dropped because they've happened to support independence. We had a bizarre situation in the past few weeks where elected Labour politicians, Labour councillors, have been suspended by the Labour Party for not voting with the Tories.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So, do you think can you ever see a scenario where Labour are willing to accept reality and democracy in Scotland?
Well, I mean, it's very worrying because we in the recent council elections in Edinburgh, for example, the SNP won the election. They came out as the biggest party, the most number of seats, the most votes, and yet Labour have chosen to have an arrangement with the Conservative and the Liberal Democrats to keep the SNP and the Greens out of office, having for 10 years, by the way, been quite content to have an SNP Labour administration for 10 years. Suddenly now, that's unacceptable, and that is what two of the Labour councillors in that group in Edinburgh, they just couldn't stomach that, so they sat in their hands, and for that they are being punished.
Yes, crazy.
Which is, I mean, all they need to do when they wise up is come and join us, and then we will switch the administration because it's entirely unsustainable.
Exactly. So I'm not going to stay on Labour for the whole of this podcast, but there is one other thing I'd like to mention before we go on to what you've been doing here. The Labour Party nearly 100 years ago had it in their manifesto that they would get rid of the House of Lords. They said it was time for it to go. That's clearly something you subscribe to. They seem to have dropped it almost altogether. They talk wishy-washy language about reform and things like that, but there's only ever been tinkering around the edges. In 2017, you led a debate in Parliament on the future of the House of Lords, and you've consistently called for it to be abolished. Many states around the world have an upper and main chamber, for looking at different pieces of business. What would you like to see an independent Scotland do with regards to the structure of Parliament?
Well, I mean, just before I answer that, just to echo your comments on the House of Lords, because I mean, it's in its nature that it can't be a representative body because it's unelected, it's appointed, but also it doesn't even reflect the demographics of the population of Britain. Never mind Scotland.
Former KGB agents. Representation in the...
But I mean, it is, it's overwhelmingly white, old, right of centre, privately educated. And the most bizarre thing I find is that there's not a single member of the House of Lords, we did an audit on this, that actually supports Scottish independence. Now, the SNP won't accept political appointments to the House of Lords because we disagree with it in principle. So that may be an element. But it is weird, is it not, given that they say that membership of the House of Lords comes from people who demonstrate, exceptional service for charity work and sports and the arts and the economy. It is bizarre that not one single person managed to scrape through the vetting who believes in Scottish independence, given that 50% of the Scottish population believe in it. And I think that it must be the case that there is some private vetting going on that we don't know about that makes sure that people who support those views never even get under consideration. But anyway, so it is an anachronism. It is absolutely, it is a blot on the democratic framework of the United Kingdom, never mind of Scotland. And it ought to go. Whether or not it's replaced by something else which is elected is a matter of debate. From my point of view, I want to be short of it. Okay, I want an independent Scotland to be out of the United Kingdom, and therefore it doesn't even have to bother with this debate. And I think we're probably likely to achieve that before there's any serious moves to reform the House of Lords going through. So if we did have an independent Scotland, what would the form of government? I think we need to do more work in this. I think in a country the size of Scotland, it's not necessary, it's not absolutely the case. You need to have a bicameral system of parliament. It depends on the nature of your main legislature and how representative that is and how it actually formulates policy and the degree of checks and balances that are built into the political system in that principal process. It also depends on the degree of decentralization to regional or local government and whether or not they have an input in a relationship with the central government, with the central legislature. So it's not absolutely the case. And I think if you have a proportionally elected main legislature, there's probably not the same case for having a revising chamber. I mean, the reason why there's an argument here for the House of Lords is because the House of Commons keeps getting stuff wrong because, you can run a government here on 35% support. So that's the problem with the UK system. Yeah. So I think we need to spend more time thinking about it. I'm not against having a small upper house, a small Senate. It does also, I know we're coming on to this, but it does relate to who your head of state is, because clearly in a system where you had a presidential system, even if it was only a ceremonial president like the Irish have, the Irish president still has some constitutional role in referring to the Supreme Court decisions that are taken by the Dáil if they are out of line with manifesto commitments or whatever. So there's a lot of different moving parts in this which we do need to think about, which is why the way to do this, in my view, and Mike Russell's been doing a lot of work with us, and I've been involved on the edge of this myself, we're talking about an interim constitution for an independent Scotland, so that at the point of independence, there's a working constitution which provides a framework to run the country and legislate, but it also sets in place a major consultation and review exercise about how the constitution itself should be reformed. And that's where a lot of questions about how we are government can be resolved. And that doesn't need to be done on day one of independence. Providing we've got interim arrangements in place, that can be done later down the line.
So, so basically that's a choice for, an independent Scotland to move forward with.
Yes, but I think the SNP probably needs to, it's one of the areas that we need to do a bit more work on. I don't think the AMS system for electing a Scottish Parliament is ideal. I think an STV system would be better. Therefore, we need to look at that. Do we need 129 members? Probably need more if we're going to have an effective committee system working within the legislature. So, and then that provokes an argument, well, what would the constituencies be? So there's an awful lot of thought to do this, but we don't. But the absence of conclusions in this isn't a barrier to progressing the independence campaign, because of course independence is all about the people making those choices at a later date.
Okay, but we're talking about the people making those choices, which brings me on to the next question I wanted to ask you about your own views about this, because they run contrary to some others in terms of Scottish independence. We saw a paper printed recently by the Scottish Government showing the UK as having a terrible record for inequality compared to neighbouring nations of a smaller size than Scotland. As a proponent of a Scottish Republic, do you see the monarchy as a stumbling block, I should say, to social and class equality? How do we approach the question of monarchy versus republic after independence?
Well, I mean, I'm a Republican. I have been since the age of about 15. Right? So
I should say official SNP policy is to maintain the monarchy after independence. Yeah.
well, let me come to that, because I'm not sure I would put necessarily that interpretation.
Okay.
I am a Republican. Ultimately, I would like to see an elected head of state and a monarchy abolished. I accept that is not a majority view, and it's not a majority view amongst people in Scotland either. The opinion polls show that by a decreasing majority, but a majority of the public are in favour of retaining the monarchy. However, the balance is changing, and I think with the accession now pretty much imminent of King Charles, I think the balance will change further. So this is a debate that I think the United Kingdom needs to have. It's a debate which other countries which with the Queen as head of state are already having. I mean, Australia has now just appointed a minister for the Republic, for example, and the Canadians are thinking about it. So, I think the world things are catching up with the 21st century, right? And people are realizing that this fairy tale arrangement of kings and queens is really something to be kept in the history books, I think. However, it is not related, in my view, to the question of independence, because I will happily work, arm in arm with monarchists who believe that Scotland should be an independent country with the Queen or King as head of state. That's not a problem for me. The discussion about head of state is something an independent country would have at a later date. It's not a precursor for actually taking the political power for independence. Now, as I understand SNP policy is that voting, Scotland becoming independent would not change the monarchy and would not change the Queen, King being head of state. And that's absolutely true. It's not a firm declaration that should never happen.
Of course.
And it leaves enough, I suppose, we'll put it this way. I've been making my Republican views quite well known. I do what I can to advance it, sometimes in a very hostile environment. And I've never had a call from head office saying you can't say that or whatever. So actually, I think it's entirely acceptable and legitimate within the SNP for us to exhibit that there is a range of opinions. And although I accept party policy is one way, it's legitimate to have and democratic.
And the membership, I think it's also important to say the membership of the SNP decide party policy. That's the...
Yes, although I'm not put up, we've got a conference coming up, and people suggested to me maybe we should have a discussion on monarchy. No, because it's a distraction.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm on the prize, people, right?
Yeah.
I said we can have this discussion in 10, 20 years' time.
Yeah.
I mean, monarchy's been about for 8 centuries, so it's not really.
So
we've got time.
In various different guises as well. Yeah. I want to turn on to your past in terms of your career. Our listeners may or may not be aware that you founded the Stand Comedy Club in a past life before Parliament. I remember in 2014 the arts and creative sector were largely pro-independence and produced a lot of good material. Do you see the same happening this time round? Do you think there's more momentum even around that? And how important is it to have grassroots non-party activists involved as well as politicians?
Very, but I mean, just to recap on me. So I founded the Stand in the mid-90s as a hobby, and I remember going into the Scottish Labour Party HQ and using the photocopier after hours to run off the flyers.
So you got some benefit from your membership.
I got more benefit than that, Drew. Because of course, when they made me redundant in '97, they gave me a very generous package to go, so they really wanted me out of the way. So, and I took that money and used it as a down payment on a building in Edinburgh, which became the Stand Comedy Club as we know it. So I probably should have Tony Blair Memorial Club across the door, really. And so and then when the Labour Party left me,
of course, as they did for so many people,
I didn't drift out of politics, but I mean I wasn't doing politics full time. I was interested, but increasingly the Labour Party had nothing to say to me. Increasingly I was always a sort of Devo Max person even then. It was a fairly easy journey to take to become a full-blown supporter of independence. And by the way, I didn't say this earlier, but just in absolute summary, the reason is this. It's not because I've changed my views about how the world should be or the type of society I'd like to live in. Mm-hmm. It's because, intelligence means that eventually you stop banging your head against the wall. And I have come to a realization that we are better able to achieve that change if we have an independent country of 5.5 million people, where there's a general consensus in the population for that sort of policy, than we are as a sort of adjunct to a much, much bigger country with almost an inbuilt conservative with a small, if not a big C, majority that keeps frustrating that ambition. So that's, and once we do it, I believe that will then be a catalyst for change in England too.
Yes, I think
because I think people will say, well, things are better there. Why are we not doing it?
I've long said this, the impact in the north of England in particular.
But anyway, your question was about the argument. Yes, so that was one of the roles I played actually in 2014. I was involved with others in a sort of artists for independence type framework. Not that I've ever been an artist. I was a club owner, right? But and I'd say, and I think at the time, yes, it's fair to say, with a few notable exceptions, fair to say the majority of sort of comedians, musicians, actors, whatever, they were writers. They were either actively pro-India or they were on balance pro-India. There was hardly any of them came out for the unionist cause. In fact, most of the celebs that came up were people that were imported from south of the border for that, with the love bombing or whatever. So, yes, that was the case. Today, I mean, it is the case if you ask their opinion. But what worries me slightly is that it's almost as if the campaign for independence is becoming institutionalized. Back in 2014, there were only 6 people in this parliament arguing for Scottish independence. So it was 10% of Scotland's representation at Westminster. Now it's 85%, right? So we're all arguing for that in Westminster, but at the same time, maybe because we're doing it professionally or whatever, it doesn't seem to be the same ferment in the grassroots, not the same excitement and creativity. Now, I believe it can happen. I believe we can spark that, because I think everybody's just waiting to get going. And when we do, I think we will still get the same fantastic explosion of imagination, where people beginning to ask questions. Well, if Scotland becomes independent, what does it mean for this, and this? In their own lives, their own industry, their own profession. People will actually ask it, and that's what made the campaign in 13, 14 so wonderful, so creative, so vibrant. And I mean, we have to recreate that, and I'm sure that we can. And I suppose our role is now, the SNP, in my view, is like it's the political leadership of the campaign for national autonomy, but it is not the sum total of it. And we need to be very sure to reach out, to listen, to not be too prescriptive, to say independence is about choices. Independence is about your right to choose what your future is. And that's the message that inspires people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about getting people motivated. The good thing I've seen over the past wee while, and we've done a number of podcasts with some activists, is groups like Aberdeen Independence Movement, who've laid on their own events and got people moving with it. And we talked earlier about the Yes group in Dundee and the video that we discussed about that. And there are a lot of people from the 2014 campaign who were opponents of independence back in the day. Possibly the world's most famous comedian, Billy Connolly, is one of them, who was against independence and now pro-independence. We've seen in the field of film and theatre and music, the likes of the band Texas, and now changed their minds on independence or pro-independence.
Oh, Charlene changed her mind.
Yes, we've seen that. Yes, we've seen that. We've now seen people like Ewan McGregor. I could name lots more. People who were either sceptical or were actually against independence are now going forward. How important is it, these names, these people, as well as the grassroots? How important is it?
See, I think that reflects a sort of I mean, I know the Tories keep saying it's not a generation, but there's a mini generational change, right? Because I think if you ask people now in their 20s, it's almost like a done deal. It's sort of like it's become the fact that Scotland will become independent is now believed by a majority of young people in a way that it's sort of just an obvious. Why are you asking me this? It's become like an obvious thing, and I think that is why just so many people. It's now become the default, right? Believing in that Scotland should be an independent country. Why wouldn't you? Right? Yeah. So, and that's slightly different. So, and I suppose that reflects the fact that all the polls are 50-50, as opposed to 75-25, which is what they were 10 years ago, right? So, I mean, that's, the support for independence has doubled in 10 years. Yeah. And our task is, we can't double it again, so I'm not expecting 100%, but our task is to take it to 60 or 70%, because, when we do this, to actually make a new country work, people need to buy into it. So I suppose the task for the campaign and for campaign managers is to get people from a position of saying aye, that's a good idea, to actually being prepared to go out and work for it.
Yeah. Finally, Tommy, we're coming towards the end of our time on the podcast. There's a question that we ask all of our guests on Scotland's Choice. If you could make a new policy or change an existing one that we currently can't do due to the fact that we're in the Westminster system, what would it be and why?
Well, I mean, difficult to choose which to do. I mean, clearly, there's the whole thing about. I mean, I think we need to stress, right, that particularly in the context of a right-wing British future, which seems to be, want to be relive past glories of empire and is very isolationist and very supremacist, really, in terms of its global attitude. I think in that context, we need to stress very much that we want our political independence in order to join in with the world. It's not a fence to keep us away from people. It's a bridge that allows us to become part of the world. So, it is when he famously said, "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on." Right? Yeah. Now, that means that when we talk, so when we talk about rejoining the European Union, for example, look, I know that may not be automatic. I know there will have to be stages to it, but there can be no doubt that Scotland's future is as part of a European mainstream, and we need to be in some sort of confederal arrangement with other European states if we are to have any sense of tackling any chance of tackling the big questions in this world, particularly in a context where political agency in London appears to be heading in the opposite direction when it comes to climate or immigration or global inequality. So independence for me is about joining in. So I suppose the biggest thing I would welcome is our ability to develop an international policy, to become part of the European mainstream, to play a full role in the United Nations, to be able to offer our good services as countries like Norway have done, to help resolve some of the problems in the world which are beyond our shores, and to demonstrate, that, as we've done for centuries, that the people who live in this country have a global perspective, a global view, and would be good global citizens. So that's the biggest thing. Apart from that, I'd probably ban fluorescent lighting.
Tommy Sheppard, thank you for joining us on Scotland's Choice.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Scotland's Choice. You can find new and previous episodes of Scotland's Choice at scotlandschoice.scot, and you can watch the full-length videos on YouTube. If you can share this podcast and our videos, it can help others with their decision on Scotland's future. I'm Drew Hendry, and I hope you'll join me next time on Scotland's Choice.